Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink I have in sample form, and it is Noodler's Borealis Black. Now, to my understanding, which is not like any great intimate knowledge or anything, but to my understanding, Borealis Black, the play on words for that is that it's meant to emulate Aurora, the brand, Aurora Black. Aurora Black is known for being a very intense, deep, dark black that is very, very wet flowing. And I tested it actually not long before I tested this. And if anything, I'd say Borealis Black, because get it? Aurora Borealis. Get it? Anyways, Borealis Black is even wetter. So, yeah. In fact, I've known a couple of people who say that Aurora Black is just too wet for them to use in their pens. And I kind of, this is too wet for me to use in pretty much anything, as you'll see. Now, like many Noodler's black inks, this one has some properties. This one is said to be water resistant, but like many Noodler's inks, especially their Noodler's black inks, the way they work is they have to bond with the cellulose or the fibers of the paper, and that does not happen instantaneously. It does not even happen as soon as the ink is dry. It often takes actually a great deal of time. Actually, I think it said that like for full bonding, it should take about 3 days. So to be fair, I let all of these inks dry for 24 hours. Now, as I said, sometimes it takes 3, but considering I usually do these tests once they've been dry for 20 minutes, I felt this would be a little fair considering this ink does claim to be waterproof. So, yeah, anyways, I just wanted to show you the swatch I have. So here is Borealis Black, and compared to Noodler's Bernanke Black, Noodler's Zhivago, Noodler's Dark Matter, X Feather, Black Eel, Texas Black Bat, Heart of Darkness. These are just 8 of the 12 black inks I ended up comparing this to in a different test. It is an intense dark black. Now, 2 pens I used were these. Now, this is a Pilot Metropolitan with a Japanese fine nib, and this thing is like trying to write with the corner of a razor blade. I don't always do so well with it because I do tend to put pressure when I write, and it's like digging a razor into a piece of paper. But yeah, and then I also use this because I tend to use 2 pens to give it a bit of a contrast, and this is my X450. One of them I have like 7, and they all tend to be pretty broad and pretty wet, which is generally how I like my pens. So I love these guys, but as I said, this is a dangerously wet ink, and this is an already wet pen, so broad and wet. So yeah, so let's look at some comparisons. As you can probably tell, intense dark black. So here is Noodler's Borealis Black, and the obvious comparison, Aurora Black, which for some reason in this swatch does not look like an ultra black, but in writing it actually is. Now, here is Noodler's for Wonder Pens Raven Black. This is another ultra black by Noodler's. It is super dark, super intense, and actually has some of the behavioral issues that Borealis has. Here's another Noodler's exclusive black because nobody makes ultra black like Noodler's, let's just admit that. This is a Noodler's exclusive for Fountain Pen Hospital of New York City. This is Old Manhattan Black, although on my label it says Old Manhattan Blackest Black. So, yep. Here's another one. Here is Noodler's Bad Black Moccasin, part of their Warden series. This one is like impervious to lasers and all kinds of crazy stuff, but also intensely black. How many times am I going to say the word black today? This is going to be interesting. Okay, let's look at the chromatography. This one on the left with a little D up in the corner, that is the one that I let dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but admittedly, I only let this dry for about 20 minutes. So, again, like I said, this ink is designed to be waterproof or whatever when it's had time to bond to the cellulose. When it fully bonds, it can take up to 3 days, but still, just look at the difference that just, you know, actually I think it's more like 8 to 10 minutes, but yeah, significant difference. The one that I did the way you're supposed to, you can see where the initial line of ink was put, and it is very clear. It is very dark, especially compared to this white background. That is intense. And then there's this green gold color all throughout, and then we get this very interesting, almost hints of blue up here at the top. And this one that was allowed to dry for 8 or 10 minutes. Dot got much darker, and interestingly, there's more of a distinct separation between this goldy green thing and then the stuff up at the top where, again, we have little hints of blue. So, yeah. Alright, chemical resistance tests. Now, this was allowed to dry for 24 hours. The same 24 hours that separated the writing of these testy things and then doing the water tests, or the chemical tests in this case. So, as you can tell, the water did get some of it moving. You can see that some of it did move. However, the stuff that's underneath, you can clearly tell where that is. 1/3 bleach solution, rather fascinatingly enough. And you can see where that smear from the ink smear, where that would have been an intensely dark patch of ink. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution turned it yellow. It didn't get rid of it. As you can see, the shading still remains. It didn't get rid of this black ink. It just turned it yellow. And where it was laid on just obscenely thick, it couldn't even turn that yellow. Now, ammonia pen flush did start to get it moving, but not as much as water, weirdly enough, and it actually started to break apart the page. I hope this comes through. Like, the fibers actually started to come apart. And weirdly, the same with hydrogen peroxide, but yeah. Anyway, so that was with 24 hours. Bear in mind, for a full bonding, it probably would take 3. Okay, paper test, top-down to density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Now, I got such bad results, because I do these tests in the order that they're shown. So I start on Clairefontaine, then I do Fabriano, blah, blah, blah. So when I first started doing this, I could not believe the results. So I cracked out, I'm not kidding, I dug up from the bowels of the earth 4 different kinds of Clairefontaine paper. Now, this is a 90 gram per square meter paper. It is a very fine paper. I got these results the whole time. So, like, on every single piece of Clairefontaine I used, so I just used the initial piece that I did the test on instead of showing all 4, because they were all the same. Maybe I got a bad batch. You know, like, maybe this is a flawed bottle. Maybe this is a flawed sample. I don't know, but these are the results that I got. I'm not saying this is what will happen to you, but I'm saying this is what happened to me. This was the sample that I got. So let's get into it, because there are problems. Now, that Japanese fine took 10 seconds to dry, but that fairly broad and wet JinHao took 19. And this is an extremely wet flowing ink. This is a 7.5. Whatever's going on with this ink, it was aggressively seeping into the page, which is why it didn't take longer to dry, because it was sort of pummeling the page and then sinking in, and it was not good. And in fact, we even have feathering in that fine nib, and it is all throughout. This happens all throughout the entire piece of paper. And it had only been in the pens for 24 to 36 hours. When I first inked it up, I had just completed using some of the sample to do my 12 Noodler's black ink comparisons. And I was enjoying it because this is an intensely dark black ink. And I was using it to like address envelopes and whatever. But yeah, it's problematic. It is an intensely wet ink, like almost out of control wet. And then it was already in a broad wet nib. But I just want to show you this. Now, yes, that is a broad, wet JinHao, you know, and it's an intensely black ink, but, yeah, we're getting stuff coming through. Like, some of these dots are nearly coming through, and there are actually even a couple of spots, I wish I circled them, but, like, here, so you see how there's that dot right there? That's actually starting to come through, and that is the Japanese fine. And then the water test, it physically pushed it out the back. Now again, I gave this 24 hours to dry, and probably a full bonding would have taken 3. But as you can see, 24 hours, it is very clear and very there. But it did dye the page. It did get a bit lighter. And that X450 just absolutely exploded. Yeah, so I mean, it's recoverable, but the initial results in the first place weren't great. Now, this is Fabriano Eco Qua. It is an 85 gram per square meter paper. I love this stuff. It is generally able to handle inks that even Clairefontaine and Rhodia buckle under. And, yes, as I say somewhere along here, even my beloved Fabriano can't take it. Yeah, this stuff is super resilient. But even here, we get feathering. And we don't have as much of it with that fine, but we do have it in a few spots. We have problems. This is, I mean, it's not always super feathery, but there are feathering areas, and there are little feathering areas throughout. Just in some areas, it's very intense. Now, that Japanese fine took 15 seconds to dry, and that fairly broad and wet JinHao took 33, and it was still kind of aggressive with the paper, but anyways, so usually I don't like my black inks to shade, and this one certainly doesn't. It's an intense black ink. It is less like a Borealis, which is light, and more like a black hole. Like it sucks in light, but yeah, here you can almost get some shading, and actually, it's not going to show up on camera, I can tell already, but there is just the barest hint of red sheen, like a hazy red sheen in certain areas of the scrubby. But yeah, we, here in a few spots up at the top, especially with the dots, we have very near bleed through, we have some distinct show through. I mean, this is an intensely wet ink, and it is seeping into the page. And so you can tell that there's something on the other side, which is distressing, because this stuff is usually like a tank. Now, again, I gave it 24 hours to dry, and it did move a little. It did turn the page slightly green. Now it just sort of looks like Noodler Zhivago, which is kind of fascinating. But as you can tell, it's very clear, very there, very dark, didn't feather, didn't explode, absolutely recoverable. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter, where we kind of have more of the same. Yeah, we have feathering even with the fine nib, and there's a Japanese fine nib. I circled it, but I don't know, maybe it's not as easy to see on camera. But, oh, the U in jump. Yeah, but, yeah, that Japanese fine took 15 seconds. The fairly broad wet JinHao took 32. I think the ceramic coating that's added to this in the pressing process, because although it is physically thinner by 10 grams per square meter than Clairefontaine, it does have that element added to it, and I think that is actually helping it a lot, however that stuff works, because we don't have nearly as much feathering or weird texture on here. It's starting to calm down a little, or it seems to. I say, maybe there's some sheen, because again, and yeah, I didn't want to show up on camera, but we have some hazy red sheen, you can almost see it, in the scrubbies, and actually in a couple of areas in the writing. But because it is so dark, it's so wet, and it is in a fairly broad wet nib, there might be a little bit of echo, but honestly, it might be the quadrilateral that's saving it and making it less noticeable, but I don't know. Now, water test. It did dye the page a little bit. It is starting to look like Zhivago, or, I don't know, either Zhivago or, is it L. Lawrence? Something in between. Now, that Japanese fine, that is a razor thin line. So the fact that it is still that clear and that dark after only 24 hours is rather impressive, because a lot of times there's just not enough ink there for it to resist being washed away. But you could absolutely recover that. So, and again, the bonding probably takes about 3 days. So the fact that it did so well after 24, I almost want to, like, after these tests, just, like, start washing this and see what happens now that it's had a couple of weeks. But yeah, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo, and we got pretty much everything but the shading. So, which is good, because, you know, usually I like my black inks to not shade at all. I know not everyone does. A lot of people like their black inks to shade, because it sort of shows that this was, you know, a fountain pen rather than a roller ball. But we had some absolutely epic dry times on here. That Japanese fine took 1 minute and 32 seconds to dry. Usually I stop counting at 30, so when the Japanese fine took more than 30 seconds, I was like, oh, I gotta see where this ends. Yeah, it took 1 minute and 32 seconds for that razor blade fine to dry. But, I mean, this is an intensely saturated ink. There is a lot of stuff in this ink, and something weird is going on, and it is freakishly wet. So, with the way this paper works, I was expecting long dry times. Was I expecting over 1.5 minutes for a Japanese fine? No, I was not. But good God almighty. Anyways, that X450 took 2 minutes and 6 seconds. But hopefully this will... there we go, finally. Oh, it's not showing the red. There is a lot of red sheen on here, and it is all throughout the writing because this ink was just coming out so much that it pooled up, and then it took so long to dry that it allowed it to settle in a sort of even distribution, so that it just everything is shiny. Everything is shiny. But yeah, I say some here, some bits just never dry. Which is true, like, you know, because it took so long for this stuff to dry that the whole time I was like, by the time I got down here and I was trying to write, like, it was just so hard to, like, hold on to the page that at one point I literally put it down for like 5 minutes just so that I would be able to put my hand up here and hold it, and obviously that didn't work because you can see that I put my finger, come on camera, you see that I put my finger in something and started to smear. Because we got little smudgies all throughout. So, yeah, and those dots just never dry. Seemingly never dry. Drove me nuts. But yeah, there's no feathering, there's no bleed, there's, you know, no spread. It just took forever to dry. There is sheen everywhere. Dry times were unbelievably long. And we do get some echo, because this is intensely dark black ink, and this is obscenely thin paper. I mean, this stuff is like almost, yeah, it's almost like onion skin paper. I have a lot of onion skin paper. This is 52 gram per square meter paper. Very, very thin, and it is a very dark ink. And, I mean, in the X450, it's pretty broad logic. But yeah, so this paper is known for letting ink slide away when you add more water. And even 24 hours to dry, a lot of it washed away. A lot of it. But because of the way this paper is, I feel like even 3 days wouldn't be enough to make it fully waterproof, just because of how resistant it is to absorbing anything. Maybe I should test that afterwards. Anyways, yeah, so even 24 hours didn't do a whole lot. However, there was something. So you can see that there was writing there with the very fine Japanese nib, and you can see pretty clearly that X450, but it did get comparatively a lot lighter. So, I mean, if you gave it 24 hours, you could definitely recover something. Now, the next 3 tests, I only used that Japanese fine, except to write the name. Except this ink is so wet flowing and oddly aggressive acting that I don't know if that actually did it any favors, really. This is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. It is probably one of the worst papers I've ever encountered, which, please, trust me, that is really saying something. This stuff is terrible. I can pretty much guarantee you have something that is at least a step up from this, if not several. This stuff is just awful. But yeah, on here, we definitely get spread. You can see that there is a most noticeable increase in line width compared to the Tomoe River. So it got much broader. We have a lot of feathering, an intense amount of feathering. It is very noticeable. It took 2 seconds to dry. There is no shading. It is still an intense ultra black. Sometimes some black inks on more absorbent papers tend to sort of flatten, almost become dusty or like dark grays. That is not what happened here. There is a ton of show through. You can read this through the back. And again, this is a Japanese fine nib, but it is very wet flowing. It is a very dark ink. But yeah, that's a mess. That's a mess. And there were spots of full-on bleed. There were areas where this not only, you know, sunk in, and not even sunk into the back, but like even came out the back. So that's a disaster. Water test actually did very well. That is supremely dark and actually pretty clear. There is some stuff that I wanted to let go. It did dye the page a little bit, but honestly, if you've seen some of my other tests, this is a very good result. So yes. Next up is Mead Notebook Paper, and this is from a new little notebook of Mead that I went out and bought just for these tests. Yeah, this is from a little spiral notebook. It's not great. Now there is less spread than we see on the 20 pound. It did not broaden quite as much, but it did broaden some. And as you will see, there is some feathering. Yeah, and there's a woolly texture. You can kind of see the pulp of the paper. It took 2.5 seconds to dry. There is show through. You can definitely see that there's writing on the other side, and you can pretty much read it. But if you can see just how hazy it does not get that dark. Nowhere near as dark, certainly, as the 20 pound, which means that there is nowhere on here that it rendered onto the page below. So while it would be very uncomfortable to write on both sides, at least it didn't ruin the next page as well, which cannot be said for the 20 pound. So, I don't know, small mercies? But yeah, the water test, a lot of times this paper can absolutely just freak out when you add water. And it kind of did when you look at the like physical topography of the paper. But that is very clear, very dark, very there. It did feather a little bit, but honestly not a whole lot more than it did up above. So recoverability is high. Now, Moleskine notebook paper is my nemesis. I hate it, it's terrible. And they make you pay a lot of money for it, so this is going to be a train wreck. That's not a spoiler alert, I think we all know that. This is terrible paper, this is an aggressive wet flowing ink, and it's been killing Clairefontaine, it's been messing with Fabriano. Moleskine is gonna get wrecked. And it was. It was wrecked. So 5 seconds to dry. It is extremely feathery and woolly. It is just hideous looking. And there are a lot of spots of bleed. So this not just came through the back, it got onto the page below. So yes, this is Japanese fine, but it not only ruined this page to look at because it's hideous, not only ruined your ability to write on the back, it already affected the next page. So, meh. And then this water test did something that we have only seen here. Now, despite having 24 hours to dry, it really like released, and like, can you see how much that dyed the page? Like, it's really like starting to like just, and it's this stuff too. It's the stuff that we see at the top of the chromatography that has like hints of blue. I really hope this comes through. Like, this is weird looking. And it really like started to release, and it started to feather and explode. I mean, if you had smaller handwriting, and especially if you wrote in cursive, I mean, that would start to get very difficult to read. Anyway, so there you go for your consideration. Noodler's Borealis Black. Honestly, because I really like Noodler's. I like all the stuff that Mr. Tardis does. Tardif, not TARDIS, God. Something's wrong with me today. You know, I admire his ambition and his imagination, and so I really wanted to like this ink. However, going by the sample, even though this one has water resistance a great deal more than Aurora Black has, experience-wise, I would probably be more likely to recommend Aurora Black. I'm not saying this is the experience everyone has, or that you will have, but this is the experience that I had. These are the tests that I did. From these results, I'd stick with the original. But yeah, that's a test for another day. Yeah, for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.